is there a way uh for somebody like me? Because here's what I struggle with, right? We kind of talked a lot to a lot of numbers today, and things that don't necessarily match up to kind of certain narratives on social media, certain narratives that you might read, certain places. One thing that I struggle with, and I say this all the time, I struggle knowing like how to look into things, right? Like um data, studies. I feel like I could find one study that says something on one topic, and I could find another one that says something the exact opposite on the same subject, and no one kind of teaches you as the citizen how to like sort through data, how to get to the truth. So like as someone who specializes in this, if you had to kind of give tips to somebody who is not as knowledgeable as you on how can they look at information, at stories, and kind of get to like the truth, what would your tips be for like an average citizen?
Well, I think one of my most basic tips would be when you're looking at studies, you're right that there seem to be a lot of contradictory studies, but there's a very specific reason for that. The question to ask is, what did they adjust for? So, I mean, like in many, many cases, the question of what you find depends on kind of the level of analysis that you stop at, if that makes sense. So, like, let's look at police shootings. If you look at police shootings at what's called the first level of analysis, just raw numbers would be a good way to look at this. You'll find that more white people, particularly poor whites, get shot by cops. So in a typical year, there are about 1,000 or 1,100 people shot by cops. Well over 500 of them are just white. They're Caucasian guys. They're not even Hispanic guys. 250 of them are black guys. Now, if you take that to the second level of analysis, which is called I sometimes say univariate because it makes more sense, but it's called a bivariate regression analysis. You could sometimes do a version of this as a t-test analysis. Um, you're going to see that black people are proportionately more likely to be shot by cops, and that black people make up only 13% of the country, but we make up about 25% of those shot by cops. So we're 250 out of 1,000 now. So we're about twice as likely as you'd expect. Now, the third level of analysis is multivariate regression analysis, or if you want to go over time series analysis, something like this. Now, there are more sophisticated, you might be able to do something Bayesian with this. There are more sophisticated versions of analysis. I would normally stop at level 3, but if you put in other things in what's called the model, like for example, the crime rate for African Americans and whites, you see something crazy, which is that the black and white rates of police shooting come to there's a null point. There's no statistically significant difference between the black and white rates. So you've got twice the per capita rate of blacks being shot, but 2.2 times the per capita rate of violent crime for black people. So you find no difference. There's, a p value, as we call it, of like 0.89. So when a study finds something that stands out and then another study finds the exact opposite, the thing to know is just that they're looking at different things. So if I just look at raw numbers, I find that white people are more likely to be shot. This is what a lot of kind of alt guys online find. Just like, hey, remember that we're the majority. Tony Tempo. Then if I just look at, if I not just, but if I go to the next level and I look at per capita, this is Washington Post. This is where journalists usually go. Most journalistic analyses are good but univariate. I'm going to find that black people are more likely to be shot. If I actually do the full scholastic analysis, I'm going to find that there's no difference between the races at all. So that's Roland Fryer at Harvard. So, I mean, I guess what I would say is when you look through these studies, I mean, you're clearly at the level where you could read the methods section, something like that, to see what they took into account. In general, a study that involves race and that finds, actually, I think this is a point that's so broad, I will say it. A study that finds racism or sexism is generally worthless if they don't take other very important things like social class into account.
Okay.
So, like, I recently saw that a study that claimed to have found one of the ways that people claim to find racism. There are actually two things that are worth talking about here. Two of the ways, I guess. Two of the ways people claim to find racism. One is look at whether black people are more likely to be stopped during the day than at night. And supposedly that's evidence that racism is an operation if they are more likely to be stopped during the day, because at night it's harder to see if someone's black. And I guess what I would say there is you need some kind of social class adjustment, like make of the car. I'm not really an expert on this kind of research, but like at night, you also wouldn't be able to see the quality of the car, the number of people in the car,
Hmm.
whether the tags were expired, any of that kind of thing. So you can't assume racism unless you adjust for the class proxy. Like I didn't say that especially well, but it's really obvious. Another thing would be, and this I do know at an expert level, what are called list experiments. So a list experiment is a situation where you send in, say, 2,000 resumes to different employers that have stereotypical black names on one half and white names on the other half. And if you find a difference in callback rate, and people often do, it's usually about 7%, between the black names and the white names, you might say, well, I found racism. But the problem with that is that the black names and the white names are also going to vary in social class. Like stereotypical black names are obviously a lot more working class, let's say,
Hmm.
than stereotypical white names. Like a stereotypical white name is like
Steve.
Bree, or what's up?
Steve.
Yeah, Steve. Steve could be used, but it would be even more than that. It would be like Bree Joy. Whereas a stereotypical black name would be like Jamarian. So, like, they're not entirely hood, but like people are probably more likely to hire Bree than Jamarian to host the front desk at a restaurant. Like
Yeah.
I might be myself. I don't know. I'd have to look at the resumes. So the way to do that would be to adjust. Two guys named Derolia and Kodal actually did a really good version of this, where they gave people last names that were just obviously minority. Like they got some bullshit about this, but there's really, to me, no doubt about the names. They were like Hernandez, Blackfellow, like I mean, this type of thing. And then they gave them just standard first names like John, Marcus, Chloe.
Hmm.
And they had those people apply for jobs. And there was no difference between like the upper middle class minorities and the upper middle class whites. So I guess look for what's adjusted for, look at whether class proxies, things like that, region, IQ, whether that was thrown into the mix. And if it was, and if racism is still found, then yeah, they found racism, which still sometimes happens.